So, Monica and Robbie, I'm glad that you could join me to talk a little bit about the show, The Running Show. And Monica, I want to start by asking you about something you told the New York Times 8 years ago
Oh
when
dear.
you were doing an interview for Three Acts, Two Dancers, and One Radio. And you said, I don't feel like I've ever been a perfect fit in the dance world. And I'm wondering, have audiences caught up to what you do? Has society caught up to what you do? Because it seems like we are more welcoming of that which is unfamiliar now than we
Mm.
might have been 8 or 10 years ago.
That's such a great, I mean, it's interesting. I think so often what I feel as a dancer, I mean, I got into this because I loved dancing and I feel like I that's my identity is as a dancer. And I think when you're really immersed in an early age and that classical training that you have a sense of the potential for beauty and grace. And that's what I feel like I never rose to. I felt like as a human being, but also as a performer, I just didn't feel comfortable in that aesthetic, in that identity. So I think in some ways when I said that, and it still does feel sort of true, I also feel like I don't see myself as the ideal dancer. And I think I I moved towards creating shows and towards collaborators, like Robbie, because I felt like I was interested in creating and uh, being able to perform work that felt like it wasn't striving towards beauty or grace or admiration, that it wanted to relate to an audience. And something Robbie and I talk about all the time is that understanding the role that the audience plays in our work and how we're relating to them and what we're wanting from them, and when they I don't know, it also feels like they constantly sort of let us down and then cheer us up, that there's a real back and forth that feels very alive in our shows. And I think that when you're being admired by an audience, the relationship is a little bit more one way. And I think I'm interested in it. It's sort of going both, being more of a real conversation. Um,
Well, it's interesting that you say that because Robbie, given your position at the quote unquote press desk in the show and the sports analogies that are drawn, what Monica basically just said, with the audience, sometimes letting them down, sometimes be cheering you on. That sounds like exactly what fans do at a sporting event.
Yeah, and I think so much of the running show was really about trying to steal those narrative elements that work so well in sports, Like how does it change your experience of dance if you are watching movement and you're hearing like this person was injured or this person started dancing when they were 4 years old or this person is 70 and they're dancing or as you get information about people, you get more attached to them. And then I think the show goes even a step further and you really get invested in the stories of people that they share with us over the course of a week. And I hope it really works that you actually in the audience feel like hearing more, like hearing the voices of these people and understanding their stories makes you more invested in how they move on stage.
Well, and you do get invested because I felt as elated at the end of this as I did, particularly for me as a hockey fan, when you score in the last minute, without having to go into overtime
Yeah.
or just any Stanley Cup playoff or final. But I mean, I felt that same elation by the time, the carefully chosen use of Queen. I don't want to give away the songs I think people should experience. But I think that moment, particularly when the rest of the company joins you, Monica,
mm,
it's so satisfying. I mean, it feels like the elation you get when your team does well. I assume
mhm.
that's intentional.
Absolutely. And I mean, just from the inside, like just to have those dancers, especially as, we've all felt coming out of a time of isolation, just the moment where you just feel all of those like physical bodies around you and we're all in step and we're all moving together. And there's something that I feel so moved internally. I mean, I think in a way, Robbie and I are always trying to make shows that make us excited and nervous and have feelings that then hopefully we're able to transfer those feelings or share those feelings. But from the inside, that moment where I feel them all rush in is like such an emotional, that's just such a high.
How much does fear play a part in your desire to create for both of you? Because a lot of people I talk to go, if it doesn't scare me, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm looking at you, Robbie, because
Why?
you have to remake the show every time we do it. And I think every time it gets better in a certain way, like the ADF version, like the moment where they're talking, the two dancers are talking about how mistakes matter more as you age. I just sort of feel like there's nothing that became my new favorite section of the show. And I think you give yourself such a like creative cliff each time because you're remaking the show and it feels like it has the expectation of being better than the one we just did.
It's just a way of hiding the fact that I don't really want to perform it. Because that's the part that I'm afraid of. I think if I really had to like go into therapy with myself over it, I would say like I really feel like I did. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons that I really want to recreate a different version of the show every time we do it is to sort of avoid having to do it in a funny way and to constantly stay in the creative process and the iterative process, you know, to constantly be editing and making. It's just such a more comfortable place to be. um,
Mm,
I also feel like, you know, we got into doing this because it's live, and I think we have a very different skill set in that regard and a very different interest in that regard. I think, you know, dance is like incredibly rehearsed. You're rehearsing today the moves that you're going to do in a month, and you've already rehearsed them
yes.
for years, but you're still going to do them today. And I'm not going to like read the script out loud because it's not fully written yet, because the show will be remade, you know, for the students and for the community there in some way. um, so it's a really, I don't know, there's a real, I sort of want to make sure I hold down the side of the bargain in a funny way of our collaboration, which is to try to make this thing that seems incredibly, that is incredibly rehearsed and incredibly perfected over time, seem really live and like it's
Mhm.
happening for the first time in that moment. And I feel like that's sort of my job in the show.
But your job also strikes me as one of an editor. I mean, because you're taking all these interviews that you've done over the course of the week. So what is it you're looking for? What do you think is most important to find out of those interviews? As somebody who does interviews, I'm intrigued by how you look at the end result.
Yeah, I mean, something that seems really sort of surprising and also relatable to an audience. I mean, I think I approach it all as somebody who doesn't dance. Like I'm not a dancer. I have no dance training, and I honestly I don't even see a lot of dance. I mean, Monica is my connection to the dance world. So I think when I interview people, I'm really looking for something that they're saying that I think I would relate to and that people like me would relate to. And something that's specific to them, you know, not something very general, but, you know, I think the hope in some way is to make a show that makes people who don't see dance feel like, oh my gosh, I see myself in that show. So I think so much of the interview process is about finding those moments when people can really relate to a dancer.
And Monica, how do those choices affect how you respond to the text that's chosen for a given show, or how you want the dancers that you've assembled over the course of the week to respond?
Well, this is, I mean, I feel like that's such an that question implies like an artistry that in some ways doesn't totally exist. I feel like what Robbie's saying, like I will go in, you know, to the studio today and by myself just run the show from beginning to end with all of the like emotional feelings of, you know, like somehow it's just this strange practice and repetition. And so one of the things that's really hard is not being influenced by what I'm hearing. And Robbie does something that I so appreciate sort of midweek, that the he'll share clips from all of the cast that they've and most of which won't make it into the show, but sort of everything that strikes him that every person says. And I will listen to those, and it feels like in this way where I've been dancing with these young performers and we've been working together, but you don't really get to know. I mean, as dancers, we don't talk a lot in the process, that we're just really busy moving, which is a way I think of actually getting to know each other on a certain at a certain level, and you can feel very connected. But I learn more in these snippets of interviews that Robbie shares, and I really feel moved by that by myself in the hotel room 2 or 3 days before we get on stage. And then by the time we get on stage, it's there's almost always music over what Robbie's saying or the quotes. And I'm like really hearing the music to stay in line, so it's a funny math problem in a way that I wish I could sort of say I was very moved while I was performing. But I think in the way that dancers are also athletes in their desire for accuracy, I think there's a bit of a lack of an emotional experience that is funny outside of the physical. There's that moment where Jerry Houlihan, who's the older dancer, where she and I hold hands for the first time, or where Flannery and I, or our rehearsal director, are holding hands, or when the dancers all join. Like there's these physical moments that feel very emotional. But in a lot of ways, I feel like I don't get the privilege of actually having feelings about the show we're making, because I think I would just screw up my job. I would sort of feel I would I don't know, also take away from what we hope the audience is feeling, that if I sort of had an emotional reaction to it, that robs the audience, almost like laughing at your own joke somehow. So I have a lot of feelings in retrospect and before the show, but very few in during the show.
Well, you go through a lot in the show. I mean, it's physically demanding for you more than anyone else in the show for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So you said you have views in retrospect. Having performed this show, have given it its world premiere in July, what did you learn from that production, and how much does that inform or influence any alterations you make as you move forward with it?
Yeah, I mean, we were at the American Dance Festival, and it was the first time that we had actually done. I mean, we had done workshops of the show in one community, but that was the first time we actually had dancers from all over the country and all over the world. Actually, there was some international students there that were in our cast, and it really felt like, in some way, Monica also mentioned Jerry Houlihan, who will be coming out to California with us, which isn't normally how we do the show. But in so many ways, I feel like we covered so much more of the kind of breadth of experience that a dancer might have. I think the show, because there was such a diversity of people who were involved in that production, I think we just covered so much more. I think that we kind of start off telling the story of the running show with going into ballet and sort of the world of ballet, because so many dancers do start in ballet. But then Jerry Houlihan, who was with us and who's 77 years old and will be at USC with us, is just like, I mean, this amazing modern dancer who has been in some of the most incredible modern dance companies. And I feel like she really allowed us, like her story being in the show kind of took it to this other place where you really started to see people rejecting ballet and why they reject ballet and what happens as you sort of go through a whole career where you go through these different movements and different sort of styles of dance. And there's something about that, just the breadth and sort of diversity that was able to sort of come out of that experience. It feels like, to me, like, oh no, how do we recreate that? How do we make sure we have people who are on stage that have a similar kind of breadth of experience as the cast at ADF, or how do we represent all of that in the same way?
Well, and Monica, it seems like seeing Jerry on stage sort of answers the question that your father asked, which is, what are you going to do when you can't do this anymore? Well, who said there's an age limit to which you can't do it? I mean,
Yes.
Jerry's proof that you can still keep doing it.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. And I think there's also you know, I think the show is uh offers a challenge to an audience of who do you think should be on stage at a dance show. And I think, you know, trying to sort of parse out, you know, what our expectations are for who dancers should be, and what we will be moved by. And I think, you know, it's a field that for all sorts of realistic reasons has so many more younger people in it. And I worry about that as for a lot of reasons, not just for the sort of health of the people who've really invested their lives studying this and doing this, but also for the audiences. I think what Robbie says about, you know, an audience, I think so often audiences have a hard time relating to dance as an art form because the people that you see doing it are such exceptional um, technicians and athletes, and that you don't feel as related to somebody. Like if I were to watch somebody run a marathon and I had just recently thought I would take up jogging, you know, I sort of, that would be intimidating. I don't think that would be inspiring necessarily, or I would feel like, you know, that's sort of a level that doesn't represent the life I'm leading. And so I feel like there's something, you know, yes, I think Jerry does really so beautifully and with such sort of um, strength, really makes you doubt that retirement is, you know, is sort of within her realm. That you,
Yeah.
once you see her perform, you just think, yes, this is this is dance. This is what dance can be.
It's interesting. I had a chance to talk to Cheetah Rivera a few years ago, and
Yeah.
I asked Cheetah if there was, you know, I proposed the question that's in that a chorus line, you know, almost ends with, "What do you do when you can't dance anymore?" She goes, "I'll never stop dancing."
Yeah.
She goes, "I'll die if I stop dancing."
Yeah.
And Cheetah's 80 something at this point, you know, so it's like I
Yeah.
sort of feel like we all have a lot to learn about how much we're capable of doing
Yeah.
that is beyond what our expectations are, particularly with the information we were given when we were growing up. I
Yeah.
think that's where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot to learn by collaborating with other people. What have each of, I know you're teaching these dancers at USC Kaufman School of Dance for the show at USC. They have a lot to learn. What do each of you learn from your collaborations with these young students and dancers?
I mean, go, Robbie.
No, oh, you go ahead. I mean, I'm happy to say something. I mean, I uh, I think particularly since you know, over the past couple of years, a lot has happened, and I think particularly going back to speaking to just being in a community full of like 18 to 25-year-old people, and to see people who are really like in the thick of figuring out who they are at a moment when it really seems like so much of the institutions that we relied on and so much of the country in so many ways is just not there for them.
Mhm.
um, to me it's like incredibly moving, and it makes me feel very fortunate and very lucky, and makes me want to work even harder to preserve the things that really existed for me when I was 22 years old and I decided I wanted to like move to New York and make a life in this. And I don't know, I feel like people are just really working incredibly hard in a way that I feel like my I did at that age, but there's so little that's like really exists that they can kind of grasp right now, and I feel really just fortunate that they're really trying, and I feel so moved when we meet the cast and they decide that they want to do this crazy thing of like adding 25 hours of work to like 5 days in their week and spend that time with us, because I think there's so many good questions that the younger generations are asking now about how much should we be paid to work, and like who gets to work and what is work. And I think, you know, I don't think my generation really asked these questions in the same way, so I feel like I'm really learning so much from them by having this experience.
yeah, I feel like I would have attempted to say exactly that. I mean, there's something really inspiring of understanding, especially as dancers, that just when the window of time in which you so often, whether it's through studios or high schools into college programs, that these tend to be the most active years of a dancer's life, and that these dancers, just at the time where I felt like I was finding my identity in dance and performing, and it somehow, I was able to dance all through high school at this public school, and it just, I mean, it made me understand myself at a time when I think it's so challenging to know who you want to be and who you are, and to feel confident in that, and to just understand that these performers sort of navigated that on their own, and that they're coming back into it with this pause that, I think all of us understand what that meant, but to have experienced it in my late 40s is so different than what it would have, what it was for them to experience it. And
Yeah.
so there is just such an it's really inspiring. I feel really lucky that we've been making the show for a few years now, and it gets all confusing with the pandemic, but I feel so grateful that the show brings us into contact with a 12-year-old and a group of 18, 19-year-olds, and with Jerry. I've always feel like you can understand the moment you're having in your life better when you're in conversation with people who are all at different moments um, in their lives. That perspective is, yeah, just feels so incredibly
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah. It's really wonderful to like be around people who don't have 40-year-old people problems. Like I have 40-year-old people problems. And then we get to be with a dancer who has 12-year-old people problems and 19-year-old people problems and 77-year-old. It's so great. I remember talking to one of our students during the pandemic when we did an online version of this. And I asked her, like, what is it like graduating with a degree in dance when the whole field is just like on pause? And she just said, it's like being launched into nothing. And I feel like that phrase just like burned itself in my mind. Her name's Catherine De La Cruz, and she went to Hunter College, and she just really like summed it up for, I think, for what it felt like to us, to and why we really wanted to like make sure we brought this show back and make sure we, went around the country and did it as much as possible, because it does feel like so many people of that age were just launched into nothing. They just graduated into a field that didn't exist, and hopefully this gives them an opportunity to do something that they haven't been able to do in a long time.
And somehow I envision that title being used somewhere by someone, whether it's the two of you or someone else. It's such a great phrase.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Speaking of greats, I want to talk about two of the athletes that are mentioned in the show. One of whom has just started her last tennis tournament
Yeah.
at the age of 40. Um, and as I was watching the running show, I just, and knowing how old you are, Monica, and how old the dancers are, I'm wondering, this show so celebrates the athleticism of dancers. And I'm wondering what the emotional, physical, and psychological price is of maintaining the level of performance ability you have to do the running show.
You know, it's so, I feel, just makes me stutter. So clearly, there's a lot there. I mean, it's a funny thing that you spend so much time training to hope to, you just want to be needed. I mean, I feel like I'm, saying a line from the chorus line, but you spend all the effort because you want to have, um, that be necessary. And I think what I love about the running show, and was very intentional in creating it, is that it is just sort of like a series of physical hurdles to to get over. And there's kind of, I feel like it's almost a running joke with every time we go back into rehearsal, the turning section is really like, that is literally like the most number I can do. And I always, when I start working on it, I can't hit that number, like when I go back into rehearsal for it. And so there's always a moment, and it'll probably happen again. And I won't remember that it happens every time. And I'll take it very seriously, where I say, like, I think we have to lower the number. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get to that number. And there's like a real process around that. And that's humbling. I don't know, the show does sort of a wonderful trick to your mind where it feels like I can't quite achieve it. And then to be able to achieve it really feels like you've done something. It's all invented, of course. That's the sort of, I don't know, like, larger joke of it, is that there is no contest. It is all made up, but it really feels like you succeed in the way that you do. I think, feel if you win a game, that you just don't know if it's going to work out. um I don't know, I love it. I mean, I love this show so much because I feel like it's almost beyond my physical grasp, and it really feels like, it feels very real to get to the end of the show and have succeeded.
Well, I have to say, the only time I've seen anybody do that many spins was when I saw a Grateful Dead concert, because
Oh.
there are people called the Dervishes,
Yeah.
who just spend the entire 3-hour show spinning. Now
Yeah.
they probably have something to supplement their pleasure to be
Got
able to
it.
do that,
Keep
but
it
they don't do
going.
it. They don't do it at the speed you do.
It's good to know there's competition out there.
There is
It should-
competition. It's always stimulating to know that, isn't there?
Exactly.
So the other athlete, Robbie, I want to ask you about, and you probably are not going to be surprised that I'm going to pick Jaromir Jagr, since I'm a hockey fan.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. Yeah.
So when you were creating the show, how did you select which athletes were going to be signposts for the story that you were telling? And how would you compare Jagr's athleticism at his age to Monica's athleticism at hers? Because entre nous, the age difference isn't enormous.
Yes, it is not enormous at all. Very similar age. Um, yeah, I mean, the various athletes' names kind of make their way in and out of the show, I should just say, because it changes a little bit every time we do it. But I think signposts is the right idea. Like I talked about the Chicago Cubs in the last version of the show, but Serena Williams was a new thing to bring up because she was just on my mind. I mean, I think, yeah, she's on everybody's minds in some way right now. And I love that about her. But Jaromir Jagr, I mean, so I grew up playing hockey, and I grew up in the 90s when Jaromir Jagr was sort of at the height of his career. And just sort of seeing the way that he has constantly had to reinvent himself, kind of, and particularly now, like almost every season, where you actually have to change the way that you play the game. And then you have to change the team. And then you have to maybe change the country, and you have to change the league that you're in. And, I think the thing that I try to reinforce about this is, like, he's not in the NHL anymore. And he's not, on the All-Star team, and he's not like winning Stanley Cup championships. He is still playing hockey, like, pretty much every day of the week in order to be able to play hockey. And there's something about that I sort of want to rewrite the story of success and say, like, it's not like the last image we have of him is somebody holding the Stanley Cup over his head at 50 years old. But he is somebody who is going out and working every day and still pursuing this thing. And that is so much less glamorous, and it's so much less wonderful. And I'm sure he's just exhausted. But it seems like every year he decides, like, okay, I'm going to put on my skates and try again. And I think he's just decided to be in a lifelong relationship with this thing. And it feels more vocational than it does occupational, in a way that all of this that I'm saying really just reminds me of Monica.
Well, and I want to end by asking you about something that Martha Graham is quoted as saying. I don't know if she's going to be in the next version, because I believe it was a story that was told by one of the dancers that you did. But it's Martha Graham, so why not end with something that she has quoted it.
Yeah.
Agnes Still quoted her in the book, The Life and Work of Martha Graham, as saying, "No artist is pleased. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There is only a strange, divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching, makes us more alive than the others. For each of you, how does your collaboration make each of you more alive than others?"
Mm.
I mean, oh, no, you go ahead.
Well, I feel both the real commitment and belief in celebrating the liveness of what we're doing. That I think I am of an art form that really believes in being complete, and of really knowing everything that should happen, and then doing that completely accurately. And as much as that, I love that. I think I always want some some real meaning in the experience. And I feel like both in the content of what we make, but in what Robbie brings to our shows and brings to the conversation, it feels like it not only allows for that meaningful experience, because, you know, if we were a different kind of company, we could cast all these parts and just tour with a cast, and it could be the best cast, you know, it could be, and it could be the best quotes, and it, you know, we could codify the show to be great and then just reproduce that every time. But I think that what I'm so grateful for, and I find so much energy and so much joy in, is the remaking of it, and that it feels so real, and within that realness it feels so much more meaningful than what I have the sort of skill set and like interest and ability to do on my own, which is to create dance shows. I mean, if I were just making something, you know, solo, it would sort of be more settled, and that would make me so sad. um and so there's just a real um excitement in the constant newness, and in the perspective. You know, I think that it's so hard to have any sense of what dance is like for anyone who hasn't dedicated most of their life to it. And I feel like in so many ways there's just a perspective that Robbie's bringing that I don't, that makes me sort of see things in a way that I never have. And that feels so I don't know, that feels so exciting and enlightening, um and just fun. I mean, there's just like a genuine fun to the process of making something, to the struggle of making something. Like there's just a real joy that is not inherent in dance. It's not an art form that I think you go to have a good time. Um, and I'm so grateful for the like complicated fun that it is to make something together.
I
And
love that. I love that quote. I'm going to try to give a short answer. just, just for variety. I love that quote, and I'm going to have to look it up now, because of the use of the word dissatisfaction, which I think is like, you know, I would call Monica the most happily dissatisfied person that I know. And I think there's no way to say that Monica's dissatisfied without seeming like she's miserable or something. And it's not true at all. She's like you're an incredibly positive person. And I don't see you ever kind of come up to any road that seems difficult without kind of approaching it with a sense of positivity. And you also look back at it and you're never satisfied with what happened along the way. And I feel that way myself. So I think there's a real kinship to that, which is helpful. But at the same time, I think I get like the power of your dissatisfaction combined with my dissatisfaction. And I feel like that's really helpful. You know, I think the things that you want to change and the things that I want to change make, I don't know, I think we take really big steps and really big leaps because we're sort of going off of two people's sense of dissatisfaction with things in a way.